Have you ever thought about how long you'd like to live? Have you thought about what those last 10 or 20 or 30 years might look like? Do you want to be sitting on a couch, peeing into an adult nappy, watching 24-hour news channels, or just zombie flicking through memes on a phone while your grandchildren play and giggle outside? Or would you rather be out there with those kids, engaging in life, feeling vital and getting every single moment of happiness out of your days? Oh, if you answered in the latter, you are absolutely going to be interested in the latest book from my podcast guest today, Dr. Norman Swan. His book is called So You Want to Live Younger, Longer. He's the nation's other dad, really. Dr. Norman Swan, with his straight-shooting, no-nonsense approach to health communication. Norman, really, he brings the knowledge that you need to do exactly what the book says and live younger for longer. Dr. Norman Swan is a physician and a journalist, most recently known in Australia for Coronacast, the Walkley Award winning podcast that he hosts with Tegan Taylor. Combining his decades of experience in journalism and in healthcare, Dr. Swan has, I guess, a special way of cutting through myths, through half-truths, through misconceptions about our health and our lifestyle choices that he just delivers absolute facts, which I love. And in my experience, allowing me to make informed decisions, as much as that may be an uncomfortable decision to make because of the way that Norman's spoken about things, I'm able to go, okay, well, I guess that is what we'll do. It's a tough gig, but he's very, very, very good at it. Now, following Dr. Norman Swan's most recent best-selling book, So You Think You Know What's Good For You, Dr. Norman Swan returns with another no-nonsense book with a big question in it. So, you want to live younger, longer? It's a book just packed with the latest research and guidelines to maintain your vitality into your later years. And if you don't think that if you're in your 20s, this stuff isn't for you. Choices that we make in our 20s and 30s can be the difference between us missing our grandchildren's birthday because we're hiking the Camino de Santiago in our 70s, or missing our grandkid's birthday because it's at a venue that involves stairs. Dr. Norman Swan is a voice of reason. He's a beacon of truth. And he's somebody I point my bow towards in a storm of misinformation. I really admire his work. His new book is called So You Want to Live Younger, Longer. He's at Norman Swan on Twitter and norman.swan on Instagram. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Norman Swan. Hi, welcome to Better Than Yesterday. I'm TV host and podcaster Osher Ginsberg.
And I'm Norman Swan.
Yes! Oh, the voice that brought me sanity, the voice of hope, the life boy in the storm, Dr. Norman Swan. Thank you for doing you, mate. I got to say, I know you've worked a long time in broadcasting. I know you're aware of the role of the public broadcaster in society, but I don't think any more time in the history of our nation did your voice cause more, like what you did, your voice, you and Tegan, over the last few years has been so important. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of how important you guys have been?
No, not really. I mean, just people tell me, but you can't let it go to your head or believe it too much. But people did seem to get some comfort from being told the unalloyed truth.
And this is the thing, you and Tegan, you certainly, I'm talking about Coronacast that you host with Tegan Taylor, which is no longer daily. It's now a kind of a more weekly kind of thing, which I can only imagine is better for your brain. But just every day dealing with all kinds of calamity from every angle of the fractured spectrum of how to, disseminate a fact was coming at us from all, and fueled by fear and lockdown and money and everything. And your voices would come to me every morning and go, here it is. It's not great, but here's the facts. And it just made me so calm, Norman.
Yeah, that's what people say. And we were worried that we were winding people up. But people say, no, we're helping you to relax, which is, I just find, well, it's pleasing, but surprising as well.
Well, it's certainly, there was plenty of winding up being had from everywhere else. That's for sure. And it's like anything. It's like when you've got to tell the kids, Dad's lost his job, we're moving to Rockhampton. You know, it's a shit thing to hear, but at least you're hearing it from people you love. You know, some of the news that you guys were breaking was hard to hear, certainly when it was coming to how infectious or how deadly things were, or how far away vaccines were, or how few rat tests we had in the country. It was not fun to hear that stuff, but the way that you were able to tell us made it okay.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear. And so we're continuing once a week. And funnily enough, it's probably harder to do it once a week than it is daily.
Too much to pack in?
Too much to pack in. And you know this yourself, that when you're broadcasting, if you've done something before, I'm not going to do that again, but you don't realize, well, it's 2 years ago, since we did particularly that topic. And also, people don't have this, it's your podcast, so you remember what you did 2 years ago, but the listeners don't actually necessarily remember that.
Norman, I've got two of my best mates are both from Greenock. And your humility is very reminds me a lot of that. I'm trying to big you up. One of these guys built Stadium Australia, right? And they're both as humble as you are. You're like, dude, you don't understand. You're like, oh yeah, it's just a job. I'm like, no, mate. It's such a Scottish thing to not want to take credit for.
My family landed in Greenock from Russia in the early 20th century.
Wow, were they getting away from what was going down over there?
Yeah, they were getting away from a pogrom in Ukraine. Pogroms in Ukraine.
Yeah. Oh, mate. God, how shit that here we are 100 and something years later and same, you know?
Yep, it is.
It's pretty horrible. But I'm glad you guys made it out because the history there shows that those who didn't make it out probably didn't fare so well. So I'm glad you guys got out. And you growing up in Scotland, if it's anything like what my mate Gaz and Tom tell me, it was I'm guessing post-war. It was a little things weren't as fruitful.
Yeah, I mean, Glasgow's not a rich city. It's relatively poor in the west of Scotland. Highest coronary heart disease rate in the world, apart from parts of India. And so it was a rough town. I mean, I didn't live in a rough part of town, but it was a rough town. Lucky Hall Street on a Saturday night, not a comfortable area.
Yeah, that's my Gaz always says, "It's a nice jacket. You mind if I try it on?" And that's it. He would say, the bloke come up behind you and just say that. "It's a nice jacket. Do you mind if I try it on?" And he goes, "And you'll be walking home cold." Says, no. That's it. Gives you a jacket.
But you're lucky when they come up behind you. It's when they come up in front of you and say, "Are you looking at me? I need a bit of respect here, you know."
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to alcohol and violence because that's a health issue, and our country, particularly my city of Sydney, in my opinion, hasn't dealt with it very well. But I would love to know, what was it that took you to paediatrics? You tried to get into RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, which I love because that makes sense with how wonderful you are with emoting when you're on the mic. What was it that took you to paediatrics?
People want you to say, well, I wanted to help children and all that sort of thing. The reality is that when I was training, I was actually going to be a psychiatrist to begin with. When I got kind of the acting, the acting was interpolated into all that, and I was going to train in the United States. And I decided that I was going to spend a year or two getting a broader base to my medical training before I jumped into psychiatry. And part of that was spending 6 months doing pediatrics in a west of London hospital. And I worked for a guy who was just incredible. I mean, he was just a mentor. He was a great clinician. He really nurtured you. And like a lot of things, you said, "Oh, I'd quite like to be like him." And so I think when you're talking to a lot of people about what they chose in medicine, it was about somebody that they admired and nurtured them to go into it. So it wasn't pediatrics as such. It was the combination of pediatrics and this guy, who, by the way, was Scottish, and his name was Dr. Finlay. And so people might not remember Dr. Finlay's casebook, which was a story of a Scottish country general practice, one of the original GP dramas. And once, so my Dr. Finlay was on a plane from Edinburgh to London, and he was sitting beside the actor who played Dr. Finlay on the plane. And this guy was so shy and retiring that he never turned around to him, as they were serving coffee on the plane, "Do you know what my name is?" and introduced himself as Dr. Finlay. Never did it.
When I mentioned before about Coronacast and how, delivering crappy news to the public in the best way possible, do you think your background in paediatrics of talking to parents about their kids' outcomes may have played a role in how you learned how to do that?
Maybe. I mean, I was always reasonable. Communication, talking, expressing yourself, giving speeches, that sort of thing was always something that I liked doing. And it's true that one of the things about pediatrics is, particularly young babies, is that the baby can tell you a lot, but the parents can tell you more, and you can tell a lot about the situation. So to do pediatrics well, child health well, you really do have to be a good communicator, and you've got to be quite intuitive, and as well as being objective and scientific. So it does bring a lot of that together, which is also why I like psychiatry. The main reason I liked psychiatry, one of the reasons I liked psychiatry was I love hearing people's stories and understanding people's stories in their context. And there's no greater specialty than psychiatry for storytelling.
I've got two and a psychologist. So I'm keeping a whole
You're
lot.
surrounded.
Yeah, it's great. They've kept me employed and sane. Both my parents were doctors. I am the son of two doctors. My father, a rheumatologist, and my mum was an anaesthetist before she retrained as a GP. And I remember hearing from them, because as a kid I asked them as a curious child. But let me ask you, Dr. Norman Swan, when it comes to delivering news that the other person may not want to hear, what would you say is the best way to do it?
Well, the way they say do it in medicine is not to push it out there, is actually to do it slowly and carefully, and to see it as a process rather than a sudden thing. And so it's always good, no matter what area you're in, whether you're talking to an employee, somebody you've got a relationship with, it's actually to hear from them first. And you would know this, that if you're a good broadcaster, the most important organ is your ears, because you just got to listen. And if you don't listen, then you're not connecting. You're not connecting with the audience. You're not connecting with the person. So the first step is to say, well, so in health, it would be, what do you understand is wrong with you? What have you been told? What do you understand? What do you want to know that you haven't been told about before? Obviously, you don't give all those questions at once, but that's in your head. Mm-hmm. So, and people are not idiots. They know that something serious is going on. They're worried about their problem and so on. And what is it you want? In other words, getting a sense of where people want to be. So if people got a serious illness, it's not necessarily going to be a surprise to them that the news might not be so good. But for you to just dump it on them and then walk away is not doing anybody any good at all. So finding out what they understand, what their worries are, what they need to know, what they want to know, is the first step in being able. And if you're listening to that, then that helps you to frame, whether it's in medicine, an advertising agency, life. That helps you to know how to frame what you want to say next. I remember, it's kind of a non sequitur, but it just, for some reason, it came into my head. It was when I was living in London, and I had this relationship, and it needed to end. And I was working in West London, and there was this, and I thought, I've got to do this properly. And so I'd organised for my girlfriend to come out, and we were driving to a country pub just in the outskirts of London, which I knew was quite, so we could have that conversation. And we're in the car driving, and she said, the last time I've been to this pub before, and the last time I came to this pub was when this guy wanted to dump me.
Did you go through with it?
Not that occasion, no. I didn't.
There you go. Listening. Very important, Norman. Very, very important. Well, that's great. I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. In that it's about taking them on the journey. It's understanding.
Well, it's about them taking you. It's about them taking you on their journey, and you being on their journey, and that being a very important part of it. Yeah. And where you want to be. And so if it's taking it out of children or to adults, it's that they've probably already thought through what if it's bad news and what are my goals here. So my goals here to stay at work for as long as I possibly can at high performance, or I just need to get to my daughter's wedding next July.
Yeah,
can you do that for me? And that sort of knowledge. Then you have a conversation between adults and there. But if all that's in your head is I've got to tell you you've only got 6 months to live, which is actually rarely the case, that's not what you say, then it's going to be an unsatisfactory conversation. And if it's somebody who works for you or works with you, is, you just got to find out why. For example, if people are not performing at work, there's usually a reason for it. And often that reason is nothing to do with them, it's to do with the system and the way the system's working.
When this all went down, when the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic started to kick off in the end of 2019 and started 2020, it started to become fairly evident fairly quickly that the systems that we had in place weren't going to cope, and which I'd love to get to, because you have, not only do you have a great background in medicine, you also have a great background in systems, and certainly public funded systems, where you're working with the ABC, and you were nothing to do with medicine. You were the general manager of Radio National for a couple of years there. What did you learn about how public, was it 90 to 93? So that was that was all under a Labor government at the time. So what did you learn about government funding and then putting that policy into effect, using public dollars, and how those kind of public systems worked and how they were held to account?
Well, the first thing is that the ABC, we don't put government policy into effect. We hold them, as you say at the end, we hold them to account. The main thing about those 3 years running Radio National was that Radio National was dying, and I believed in it very strongly. And David Hill, the then managing director of Radio National, of the ABC, called my bluff because I was a critic and saying, why don't we do this? He said, okay, well, I'll give you the job, you run it and fix it up. And so it was a very intense 3 years where I had to stop a lot of activities at Radio National, sack people who were older than me through no fault of their own. They were good people, but it wasn't what was needed for moving forward. And what I learned was that there's nothing like knowing where you're going, and then communicating that to other people, finding out how realistic that is, and taking them with you on the journey and supporting them along the way. And that it is the system that allows you to work. And that's when I introduced Radio National Breakfast. It's when I brought in Philip Adams to do Late Night Live. We started Life Matters, an art series, an art sequence on Radio National. And we increased the audience by about 30%. And it was really about knowing where we were going in a complicated system, and having fairly simple objectives.
Two separate questions, but you've basically given me the same answer for both, in that when you're speaking to a patient about their outcomes, you are essentially putting a point on the horizon going, okay, so let's go this direction, no matter what's happening with your body or your health or your immune system or your bones or your brain or whatever. We're both pointing in this direction. Similarly, and let's go on this journey together. Similarly, with Radio National, you're able to go, okay, guys, this is where we're going to go. Let's just keep going in this direction. Humans tend to respond really well when they've got a horizon to move towards, don't they?
They do. The problem in that is the journey. Where we fall down on is the journey. So there are endless reports or propositions saying, here's where we want to be. and they just sit on the shelf. Nothing happens because the journey is actually what counts. And you've actually got to be able to convince people that I'm going to be with you on the journey. And here's what the journey starts to look like. So whilst we might have this modern network, which has a current affairs show at the beginning of the day and so on and so forth, here's actually how we're going to get there. Here are the steps. This is what's going to happen next week, next month, so on. Is that right? What are your suggestions, and so on? And it's the same in medicine, is that you in a world of uncertainty, you try to provide at least the framework of an idea of the journey. Because, and some people talk this about bridge building, is that the United States is a bit different. In the United States, tends to create an objective and say, come back in 3 months and show me you've achieved it. Whereas in the Australian context, it's, well, that's fine, show me the objective, but I need to know, some confidence that, and also in America, it's okay to fail along the way.
Yeah.
Failure is not a bad thing, and we don't like failure. We don't like failure, and so you've got to assure people, at least in the radio national context, my broadcast experience, is that it's actually okay to fail, and if you fail, I'll be with you. And in the clinical context, it's going to be up and down, and there'll be good days and bad days, and we'll work through them together.
Yeah, there is no learning without failure. This idea that failure is not an option is a complete fallacy. There's an unacceptable amount of failure, but failure is a critical part of learning anything.
But all too often we drop people when they failed. I mean, we make them the scapegoats for a failed strategy, and that's the problem. And people know that, and they don't want to be hung out to dry. Now, this issue of people being high and dry is something that I actually do talk about in my new book, which is about So You Want to Live Younger, Longer. And it sounds like an odd segue, but the reality is that when the aging process is directed by the brain, and no matter what age you are, and if you're under chronic stress, your brain actually changes. And it actually changes in a way which changes the way your immune system works, your heart, blood vessels, and various other things. And it actually promotes aging. One of the major things that creates chronic stress is job stress and job strain. So you're in a job where instead of your manager listening to you, your manager tells you what to do, orders you around, doesn't give you the chance to make up, decide how the job best be done. Doesn't listen to you about the system, and it's one of the causes of burnout, but you just feel chronically stressed. Another source of stress is a single parent with 3 kids on a pension. And effectively you feel oppressed and out of control of your life. And that actually makes you sick, and it can age you more rapidly.
That's why your voice was the warm bath full of magnesium salts, mate. You were the, when we had, we were talking about failure not being an option, to the point at the highest levels of our government, people were darting out of the way of being nailed down to take accountability like a cat avoiding a medicine pill, to the point where we all feel nuts because we're smart people, we're not idiots, and we're seeing our leaders kind of jump this way and that, and like, well, hang on a second, and we feel completely bamboozled and like we're the crazy one. And that, to be honest, Norman, that led to a lot of my own anxiety about what the Willikers was going on in the last couple of years. And you're right, stress is such an extraordinary thing. And the fertile ground that was, I really wanted to talk to you today about health communication. You're an expert in this sort of stuff. You've worked on quantum, you've worked on Catalyst, you've worked in broadcasting for, crikey, 40 years now. You know what it is. 12. Yeah. You're a little ahead of me. I started when I was 20, so I've been at this for quite some time.
Yeah.
There's not a lot you don't know about communicating difficult messages to the public. And fear is a great motivator. Yet, you can only use it sparingly, because once you let it out of the box, it's gone. What do you think were some of the things that could have been done better around public messaging in the first few months of the pandemic, and what can we look out for when it comes to more kind of tricky messaging coming from above?
I think the word I use is trust. And you've got to be able to trust the messages that you hear. And if you feel that somebody is hiding something, you instantly do not trust them, even though they may not be hiding something or what they're hiding is insignificant. But trust is really critical. And they came close to losing a lot of trust in March of 2020 because there was a week there where the government was starting to tell people to socially distance and not go out as much and try and work from home, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the Prime Minister was tripling down on going to watch the Sharks on the Saturday night, 80,000 people, where there was a Grand Prix in Melbourne of 250,000 people, and possibly a couple of the drivers from Monza already had COVID. I don't think the drivers particularly wanted to drive. And you had a basketball match in Western Australia, I think, with 14,000 people going. And so you have these mass events when COVID was running. And there was this sense of exceptionalism, is that we're not Britain, we're not America, it's not going to be like that here. Well, we're now seeing the fact that if we had the spread of the virus in 2020 that we've got now, we wouldn't be getting 80 deaths a day. We would be getting several hundred deaths a day. I mean, Britain had this idea that you let it rip in the first few months of the pandemic. 45,000 people died in the attempt to get herd immunity, and only 6% of people had any antibodies in the body. And as we know now, unfortunately, this virus does not behave like other viruses, and you don't develop. Apart from the vaccine gives you good coverage against severe disease, but it doesn't give you long-term immunity against infection. Next one comes along, you get better again. And it's whack-a-mole. We wanted to believe the premiers in those things, but in fact, what I knew was that they weren't actually being transparent at all. There were things that were happening behind the scenes that weren't too obvious, and that was fine for the first 2 or 3 months because people didn't realize that. But as there was more stress in the system and the stories about vaccines came out, as time progressed, more and more holes were shown in what they were doing, and there become differences between states. Why was Victoria different from New South Wales? And yet, New South Wales was the reason Victoria went into lockdown in 2021, because New South Wales was slack and libertarian, and leave it to people's sense of responsibility, and we're not going to lock down the whole city. And you get multiple points of spread to Victoria, and Victoria's locked down. That's the problem people had.
And the whole thing created such fertile ground because, and the way that I saw it, and you may think differently, the way I saw it is if you are looking to your leaders and you're looking for the people on the TV, having Auslan interpreters, basically sign the coming of the apocalypse, and you can tell that they're obfuscating. You're looking for a foundation. You're looking for something strong to stand on, and you can tell that it's not there. You're going to go looking for something that makes you feel like you know what's going on. And this is fertile ground to be exploited. And I know this is something that, sits with you because you write about it in your new book, this idea of wellness or well-being. Like it's such a danger then if you don't give people a strength or something strong to stand on. They will look for it, and it might not be from somewhere that's healthy.
Yeah, I think people are very sensible, and doctors get overwrought about alternative medicine or complementary medicine and so on. And what the research shows is that when doctors don't have good answers for something, people do go looking for other solutions. But my understanding of the research is it's relatively unusual for people to abandon modern medicine altogether. They look for it as something as an add-on. It's unusual for a parent of a young child who's got a high fever to go off to a chiropractor to have the neck manipulated when they've got meningitis. That's a rare phenomenon. And most people have a barometer inside them which knows, I know I'm not so sick, I'm not feeling that great, the doctor's not helping me that much, I will try a couple of these supplements or what have you. But then they get this strong sense, and there is evidence to support it, that they know when they're actually not well at all. and then they go back to their doctor, and they use both in a fairly fluid way. So most people have an inbuilt monitor of their own well-being, and they know when it's something serious.
But do we have a monitor of how effective those supplements that they might have ordered from an Instagram ad because they've been searching for other things? Do we have a barometer for how well those things are actually, what's in them, and do they work? And can a couple of words on a label get you out of jail?
Well, I think they were less critical and asked less of those supplements and other things, alternate diets and what have you. We're prepared to experiment with our bodies when we feel in more control. So if we go out and we buy this bottle of stuff in the pharmacy, we've made that decision. We've done our own little bit of research. I'm happy to trust that. But and we trust that possibly more than the doctor prescribing a drug, because it's the pharmaceutical industry and they make money out of this, and what about that? And so but we fall back into trust when we're seriously ill, and it really is the quality of communication that comes from the doctor. But we have got no idea about it. It's more like hope. And in my new book, Living Younger Longer, I have a huge section on anti-aging supplements. And what's really interesting here about anti-aging supplements is you think, one part of you thinks, well, this is just all bullshit and you're just being ripped off. But and I don't deal with the really mad supplements that just, that just have, there's no conceivable way that they could ever work. But there's a whole list of anti-aging supplements which should work. The frustrating thing is they should work because they're based on animal research. When you give them to an animal, like a mouse, the mouse lives 30% longer. But, and here's the lead, on the basis of a mouse living 30% longer, they say, well, you should take it too. And not only is there no evidence that they work in humans, they may not actually work in the way that you would hope them to, because we are so much more complicated. And so there's something going on there with these substances which are involved in the aging process, but don't work when you take them individually. And in the book, I talk a lot about why that might be and where we might go with that. So, for example, we all have this tendency, and I have it too, if a little is good for you, more must be better. And there's a whole series of things where there's not a direct dose-response relationship. So if you take tobacco, for instance, take smoking. The first, and this is why you've got to stop smoking and not reduce it, the most dangerous cigarettes are the first 10. So if you say, oh, look, I don't smoke much, I just have one or two after each meal, so I smoke 5 or 6 a day. In fact, that first 10 are disproportionately bad for you. Now, it's no question that 20 cigarettes a day are worse for you than 10, but it's not double. You've actually got, the first 10 cigarettes have got you to that point. Now, it's the same with supplements, is that they work, the supplement industry is asking you to take these supplements in drug-like doses, not the doses that work in your body. And there is evidence to suggest that when you give something in high dose, like for instance, vitamin C is an antioxidant. If you take it just as a supplement rather than food, it's an antioxidant at low doses, but actually might speed up aging at high doses because it works differently. And this is complicated shit.
Yeah. This is sort of stuff that I wish that I'd learned in school. I mean, I did learn a bit about research and I did learn a little about the scientific method, not enough about mechanistic data. Luckily, I had both my parents being doctors who told me a lot of this stuff. Like at a certain point, your kidneys are just going to get overloaded and just going to piss the rest of it out. So don't bother. Over this certain amount, doesn't matter. You're just going to stress your renal system.
Australians have the most expensive urine in the world. That's right.
Oh, tell me about that.
Because we're swallowing all this stuff that doesn't actually do anything, and you just pee it out.
All that testing in the sewers to look for COVID antibodies, and instead we're seeing creatine and vitamin C in the sewerage system. Australians are the most expensive urine in the world. There's your bumper sticker, Norman. There it is, right there. That's absolutely perfect. This idea of wanting to live younger, longer, which is I love a book that does what it says on the box. It's like this podcast, better than yesterday. I just like things that do what they say on the box. My goal here, Norman, and bear in mind I'm 48. I've got I've already had one hip replacement, but I need to get that redone. So I'm a little behind. This is how I want it to go. I want it to go fit, dead. That's it. That's how I want it to be. I don't want some sort of terrible gliding slope that just goes for 20, 30 years where I'm just unable to do things I want to do and watch my kids and grandkids do things without me. I don't want that at all. So, yeah, I want to live younger, longer. I don't think that's a new thing, is it? People generally work until the day they died back in the day, but then medicine showed up and the idea, and like might be controversial, you don't have to agree with me, it's just because we can keep people alive and their heart's beating, what kind of quality of life is there? And this does kind of put a bit of a question to us as a community, doesn't it?
It sure does. But as I talk about in the book, that we already are living younger, longer. For example, if you're 80 years old today, your chances of dying in the next 12 months are the same as a 60-year-old's was 50 years ago. That's how different it is. Now, you only get to 80 with that sort of statistic if you're physically younger at 80 than an 80-year-old was or a 60-year-old was. So in other words, the whole thing is about being biologically younger than the number of miles you've got on the clock. And that's happening already. So why is it happening? Is it medicine that's doing it? Well, no, it's not to a significant extent. It's partly, but no, it's not. So it is a bit like falling off the cliff towards the end. So that's already happening. So why is it happening? And it's lots of different reasons. And some of them are really macro. But if you actually look how we've got to this point, one of the most potent factors that's keeping us longer is the education system. The further you go in education, the longer you live in greater health, the later you develop dementia, cancer, heart disease, and you may never develop dementia at all. And that's not health education, that's general education. Why? It comes back to this control thing. You're in more control of your life if you've had more education. You've got more choices. You've probably got more money in your pocket. You're probably also living a more healthy lifestyle. You're less likely to be smoking. It's a whole series of things that go along with education. We're probably taking a bit more exercise now than we used to, but that's probably not part of the thing. Immunization is those sort of preventive things are working. Most of us are living in better housing. Those environmental things are what keeps us alive. So, for example, we've seen the rate of death from coronary heart disease, from heart attacks and stroke, declining by 2% per annum for 30 years. So 60% age-adjusted, fewer people dying today than did 30 years ago. And that's for a lot of environmental reasons. And stopping smoking is the other big one, is that very few people smoke now. We've got amongst the world's lowest rates of smoking. And that's huge in terms of living younger, longer. And then medicine has made a bit of a difference, which is that if you've got a high cholesterol, what I talk about in the book is you've got to do the basics first. Before you get onto the goji berries, you've got to do the basics first, which is in your 20s and 30s, know what your cholesterol level is, know what your blood pressure is. And that could save your life. Because if it is up a bit, you could lose a bit of weight, you could reduce the salt in your diet, you can eat a healthier diet. And if your cholesterol is up really high, maybe you need to go on drugs because you've got a genetic problem. But smoking and high blood pressure batter your body and promote aging. So you've got to get the basics right. Know what people die of in your family at what age. And if you've got a pattern in your family you hadn't realized that people are dying under 60 of a certain problem, you might need genetic counseling, so the things that you look out for. So do those basic things. And then doctors treating blood pressure, treating high cholesterol are helping us to get to old age quite well. So it's not that we've got no disability, it's that we're doing pretty well. You've already had a hip replacement. So what if you're in your 70s or 80s, you need to get a hip or knee replacement? It's like your 50,000 mile service, then you've got a bit of pain and disability, but you're actually not too badly off. And and keep your mind going. And then there's the stuff is what else can you do? And there's fascinating research about how you can actually intervene to keep your body younger.
When it comes to, a lot has been said about you mentioned goji berries, there's lots been said about what we eat. What does the research say about what we put in our mouths around living younger, longer?
Okay, so not too much. because those statistics I just quoted, about 2% per annum decline, they're beginning to tail off for a couple of reasons. One is we've kind of got the no smoking in the bank. We've got that benefit. The education thing is in the bank. That we've already logged that benefit. But obesity and overweight are really strongly promote a more rapid aging, so not eating too much. The thing about food is that cooking makes a difference. Cuisine makes a difference. So there's no question that eating raw food is better than eating processed food. No question. But it turns out that the way you cook food is really important. And you create anti-aging compounds in your cooking that you can never buy off the shelf in a pharmacy. So, for example, the classic example is the sofrito, which is the basis of many Middle Eastern and Mediterranean food. So you put your extra virgin olive oil in the pot, moderate heat, add the chopped onions, add the garlic, add the tomatoes, maybe carrots, and you cook that.
I'm hungry already.
Yeah. You're doing it all the time, particularly when you're busy. Now, that cooking is chemistry. Whilst extra virgin oils got great bioactive compounds and all these individual elements are, when you cook them together, they react with each other and they create an incredibly strong mix of bioactive compounds, which have an effect in their own right, but also change your microbiome, which then has an effect on your immune system and your brain and what have you. So cuisine is really important. And then people say, oh, well, what about intermittent fasting, 5-2, time-restricted eating? I cover this a lot, and so you want to live younger, longer. And the problem with intermittent fasting is your body adjusts to the lower calories. And what isn't really emphasized in people's minds is the calorie gap is really important. So one thing is that if you're going to go on one of these fasting regimes, you've got to exercise quite intensively so that you still are burning calories and stressing your body with that. And then it matters what you eat on your days where you're allowed to eat stuff. You've got to eat a very high quality diet. And then the evidence suggests that you're probably better, rather than intermittent fasting, is to have intermittent frugality, which is that every 3 days or so, if you're not a vegan, become a vegan every 3 days. This is what Greek Australians do who belong to the Greek Orthodox Church. They don't have any choice in the matter. There are fasts in the Greek Orthodox Church, maybe 100 days a year, where it's not like Yom Kippur, where you don't eat anything, or Ramadan, where you don't eat anything morning to night. These are days of frugality, where you only eat plant-based foods for a day. You don't eat eggs, cheese, blah, blah, blah. And Greek Australians live a long time. Some people, there's a researcher in Melbourne who thinks that Greek Australian who live a traditional way are the second longest lived people in the world because of their lifestyle and what they eat.
But surely I know I asked you a question about eating, and 100 total days of the year that is entirely plant-based is one factor. But there has to be other factors around sense of community, sense of purpose, sense of belonging. That has to play a role, because from what I know about loneliness is incredibly bad for you. It's incredibly unhealthy to be lonely. But if you're in that kind of community, such a strong, tight-knit community that has ritual and ceremony and planned days where you are together, that has to play a role.
Correct. And it's hard to unpick them all. And absolutely. So social interaction, social support. How many people can you call upon if you're in trouble? Is it none? One? Is it five? Five, some people think, is the magic number. Social support, interaction with others is incredible. So it's a cocktail of stuff. It's a mix of stuff. You're absolutely right. They cook in a moderate heat. You don't get burnt food in the Greek diet. They eat with family and friends. You're right. They have the frugality. They've often got a backyard garden, or in Melbourne, they've got an allotment and they look after that so they get a bit of exercise. Their herbs are fresh. I mean, just go to Cabramatta in Sydney and watch the Vietnamese community shopping. And they, they are out there you would not want to be a greengrocer for the Vietnamese community, because they are so picky, and Greeks are really picky too, that their herbs got to be fresh, their vegetables got to be fresh. And that makes a difference too, probably much more than whether it's organic or not.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation about the way we live and their housing and stuff like that, that we are, over time, we have isolated ourselves more and more and more and more. And I think we all felt that 2020, 2021, we all felt how incredibly bad it was for us mentally, physically, to not be around other people. That's never in my life, and I hope never again in my life will we have that. And we were able to identify that quite intensely. And it's such a huge part of it, such a huge part of it.
And it goes to that, and it goes to the brain again. The brain runs everything, and you take in stuff from your environment, and the brain tells your body what to do. And relationships are a part of that. It's not a mystery.
I'm so grateful you wrote this book. There's two more things. I know you're a very busy man, so I just want to talk to you about two more things. We've seen it in the States. We've seen women's health become horrendously politicized over the last 40, 50 years in America, now to the point where women's health care, the right of women to actually have actual health care procedures done to their bodies has become illegal. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. You go right into this in your book. You go into a lot of women's healthcare issues and sexual, just regular things that happen in a woman's life around sexual function, being given a name, being diagnosed, given a reason to, now it's something that's wrong with you, now it's something that has to be fixed. Where are we in Australia around women's healthcare, and what can we do better?
I think the issue these days is more acute for the LGBTQI community than women. Not that there aren't issues with women's healthcare, not that there aren't threats to reproductive freedom, but I think, paradoxically, America touts itself as the land of freedom and freedom of choice. But
I lived there for 10 years, mate. I can tell you it ain't.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are plenty of people in Australia who don't like the idea of abortion and oppose it. But the reality is, that's what I'll choose. That's what that person will choose for themselves. They would not have an abortion, and you respect that view, but not have a law which stops other people making choices about their own bodies themselves. And I think that we still have that position, and we now have laws in Australia which legalise that. I mean, I think there are still issues about men making assumptions about women, male clinicians, and it's far from ideal. But when you look at what's happened over the last 30-odd years, the things that were said about women's health and getting justice for women in the healthcare system are now absolutely true for the LGBTQI community. And the level of stress, the level of mental health issues, feeling disenfranchised, that chronic stress that I talked about, that's there in the LGBTQI community, and it's because of not being listened to, lack of recognition, and feeling not connected to the general community in the way they would want to be.
It's staggering that in the election campaign we saw young trans kids be used as a crowbar. When you know the rates of risk around self-harm, around risk of suicide and stuff like that, it's gobsmacking that happened.
Yeah. And the thing that people don't, I talk about this a lot in So You Want to Live Longer, it's about the confusing statistic called life expectancy. Life expectancy is an average, and it's an average based on what we kind of know today. So a baby born today, they say, has a life expectancy of 83. Well, that's actually not true. Life expectancy is, your personal lifespan is really what counts here. So, for example, a baby born today in a wealthy suburb probably will live to 100 because of the circumstances. And when you hear things like life expectancy gaps, for example, between non-Indigenous community and First Nations communities, a gap of 11 years, which is horrendous, you tend to think that's because if you're an Aboriginal person and you're 60 years old, you're much less likely to get to 70, and that's why there's a gap. That's not necessarily the case. the reason why there's a life expectancy gap in Aboriginal communities, the dominant reason, it's not the only one, is that Aboriginal people die too young. And when you die of a mental health issue, for example, or an accident in your 30s and 40s, you lose massive years of life. And that's what brings down the average life expectancy in the community. If you or I die at 70 rather than 90, that doesn't make a big impact on the national statistic called life expectancy.
Mm.
But if you or I die, people die in their 30s and 40s, you've lost 60 years of life. And that has a massive effect. So life expectancy goes down when young people die.
Early in the communication about vaccination, I remember them saying people over the age of 70 are encouraged to get their vaccines. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders over the age of 50. And Briggs, the great, extraordinary rapper, Briggs is like, and what the fuck is that about? He's in his mid-30s. He's like, why do I need a vaccine 20 years younger than a white person? It's not from my choices, and it's not from my genetic makeup. And I think that, for me, that's, again, down to communication. That's a huge fallacy around, the way that a person's life choices are. It's such a Gordian knot, mate. It's impossible. There were just the one thing I didn't want to talk about with women, that there's talking about, if you could be so kind to talk about the labelling of just regular things that happen with women's sexuality around desire and stuff like that. What dangers do we have if we start labelling these things?
Well, there are two dangers. One is we could become too puritanical and think there's something wrong about trying to find a way of improving your level of desire. But what the medical profession has done, absolutely, they've actually medicalized loss of desire as a woman's health problem. When you're 45 years old and you've got 3 kids and your husband or your partner is not sharing in the domestic duties, and you spend your life knackered, loss of desire. I mean, it would be unusual to actually have any desire left. Is this story there? And then what they're trying to do is find pills to improve. I'm not talking about women. I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry. So, medicalizing a social problem or a societal problem or environmental problem is actually massive. But there are women and there are men who have loss of desire for hormonal reasons. It's not the majority, and there may well be a pharmaceutical reason for that. But the dominant one is it's how we live. And fatigue is commoner in women than men. And and some women get wrongly labeled as having chronic fatigue syndrome. Well, again, if you're 45, 3 kids, and you're taking on all the roles, and you've got to think about the kids' schooling and whether they're going to the football today and what they're going to do, and your partner's not sharing in that mental load, of course you're going to be knackered. And there's no drug that's going to fix that up.
No, there's no pill to take away the never-ending laundry. That's for sure.
But the other solution there is an electric prod for your partner.
Oh well, yeah, there is that. There is that. The last thing I did want to talk to you about is that I'm a dad. I'm also a stepdad. We have an 18-year-old and we have a nearly 3-year-old. As the kind of default voice of the nation's, like, you're our other dad, Norman. I don't know if you realise that. You're the alternate dad. If we've got a dad that's just like knee deep in Sky News, with climate denial and stuff like that, we can pretend that you're our dad for a second and read us the truth, which we love. What is it that you think you did along the way that helped your boy Jonathan become who he is? Because I swear to God, mate, every time I see your son Jonathan, I am like, whatever you did, Norman, to help him discover that about himself is just mind-blowing. And I would love to be able to replicate a bit of that with our kids. What is it that you think you did early on?
I think it was his mum, actually, not me. I mean, to be honest, he was growing up at a time when I was incredibly busy. And I think he had a great mother. He had a mother who was attentive and always there for him. And he was my 3 kids, there was no difference. My 3 kids, got 2 daughters and Jonathan, and they were wrapped in love. They're also wrapped in, my ex-wife, their mum, was a pediatrician, a proper pediatrician. She got properly qualified. And we knew the rules. And the rules are firm but loving parenting, which is that you set boundaries. Your kids know their limits. They know the boundaries that they should not cross, but they know they're always there. You're always there for them. But that discipline is not absent. And you also walk the talk. You set the example. They see you working hard. It doesn't come to you on a plate. I think sometimes money is a curse in some families. And, and some parents who've got a lot of money think about that quite hard and try to show the kids a modest lifestyle. But, the kids all knew that if they wanted anything, they had to get it for themselves. And so all my 3 kids are hardworking and, I'm proud of them. They get to work before everybody else, and they're there after they leave, and they don't believe it's going to be handed to them on a plate. And they got that probably more from their mum than me, but that's what they saw.
The thing they don't tell you, and I try to say it all the time, kids never do what you tell them. In fact, they'll do the opposite of what you tell them. The only thing they'll do is what you show them. That's it. And if they're doing something you don't like, it's probably because it's something you do and they've copied it. And that's the wild part about it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I remember a talk at my older daughter, when she went to this particular school, a talk from the headmistress to parents. And she was saying, don't come to me talking about your kid's drug use when I know that you're using drugs at home. Sort that out first and then come and talk to me about your child's drug use.
We went to one of those talks as well. And it was really tricky to see. But, your heart stops when they get their P's, doesn't it? But you're like, you got to let them go.
And kids aren't using drugs to the same extent as previous generations. This is a pretty healthy generation.
I'm so grateful you wrote this book to hopefully reframe a lot of things and to know that a lot of stuff is in our control. Checking what we eat, how much we sleep, the amount of community we're a part of. I love that you used the word taking exercise, not doing exercise, taking it like you would take any medicine as a prescription. An exercise doesn't have to be a 3-hour CrossFit session. Walks with your friend is an exercise, and it's pretty amazing, mate. You're just the best, and thank you so much for being you, buddy. I know you work really hard at it, so thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Ocean.